Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chuck Levin's Live. Today we're talking 80s guitars. Dana, if you would like to count us off. Thank you, guys. My name is Sam. I am joined here by Charlie.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dana. And yeah, like I said, today we're going to be talking about 80s guitars. But before we do that, just a couple housekeeping things. Today is the last week of the TGIF Summer Concert Series presented by City Wheaton and Chuck Levin's. So this Friday evening, Jaw Works will be performing at the Wheaton Triangle, the Marion Friar Town Plaza. So if you have plans tonight, cancel them and go to the concert. It's free. There's a DJ. There is, of course, Jaw Works. There is food and drink, I'm told. And it should be no drink? Just drink. There's food in adjacent food places that you can go to. No, it'll be a good time. Weather's going to be great. We'll be out there. Hope to see you guys out there. And then second point of order is going to be our 1980s limited edition T-shirts, still available. Those are kind of here to commemorate our commitment to continuing to talk about the 1980s. So those should be available for a little while now. Grab one if you have not. Those things are super cool.
Do it.
And yeah, Emery, what's the last thing that we need to go over first?
Save it for the end.
I will. All right. Now we're gonna go straight into it. Now look, I play drums. I own a guitar. I don't consider myself a guitarist, so that's why I have these two experts here. And my understanding is that there is none more iconic 80s guitar than the Super Strat.
Well, yeah, I mean, as we point out the Frankie, the EVH sort of replica of that guitar. That guitar came about because Edward Van Halen was trying to get a certain sound that he had in his head out into the world, and he developed the guitar, the first guitar, Strat style guitar, one of the first Strat style guitars with a humbucker in the bridge, and his style his influence was so pervasive and almost severe in a way, in a good way, that he influenced everybody that came after him, and he basically created a whole sort of sector of the guitar building industry and guitar retail. I thought back a lot about it, especially since he passed away, and you look at the walls of a guitar store, any guitar store really, but particularly a place like Chuck's, and you can see maybe 60% of the guitars that are for sale now, almost 50 years after he first broke, are almost directly attributable to him.
Sure.
And like I said, that's why his influence is so severe, like I said, in a good way. Mm-hmm. But here's Charlie. He's 18 years old, and he's still carrying the torch. So it's kind of cool. So what was cool about it, and what made the Strat such an important instrument, is that it was sort of modular. You could add on to it, you could take it apart, unlike a Les Paul. And so that's what Edward did. He took the guitar apart, he painted it his own way. He had the courage to do that. A lot of people don't.
Yeah, and
I know I don't.
And at the time, the aftermarket parts industry had really matured at that point to where
it was getting there. Yeah,
it was much more accessible for guitarists to either start with a Fender instrument or
Yes.
literally
Yes.
part together their own guitar.
Well, yeah, I mean,
right?
his first, the guitar that became that was not anything Fender, right? It was a boogie body and a Wormuth neck or something like that. He had a Strat that he actually, there's pictures of it. I should have maybe provided you with one,
That's
where
right.
he's playing like a early 60s Strat, and he's got, have you ever seen that picture?
Yep.
And he's got a humbucker there.
Yeah.
And that was one of those aha moments, like, oh, so he'd been working on this for a while.
Mhm.
But, you know, everything that came after him, at least in the sort of 80s metal scene, was, you know, between Van Halen and Led Zeppelin, it was like you couldn't, you know, every band, it seemed, had like almost equal parts of those two, you know. So that's why it's fascinating. And, you know, it just kind of mushroomed and grew into different segments of the industry. I mean, what we're playing, this is pretty current period, you know, and so is that. This is much more of a modern version of it, this USA ESP, but it's all basically the same idea.
Right. So if you had to, this is always contentious, is defining a style of guitar. Is there a quintessential definition? Not that you want to necessarily push on people, but what do you think of when you think of a Super Strat? Are there like three big like features or like hallmarks to the instrument other than maybe the Strat body shape?
I don't know, what do you think?
Floyd Rose, most definitely.
Yeah.
Humbucker, high gain, or maybe lower magnet, higher windings, or more of like an active setting nowadays at least. Kind of more reserved with the controls per se. Like there's not like a whole bunch of buttons and everything. It's like tone, that's it. That's all we got. As well as like Kramer guitars are pretty like notable with Super Strats and their style of making. Like they were big. Eddie Van Halen also with Kramer came about with that for sure. And Charvel Super Strats, like San Dimas Charvels that were upgraded back then, right after Eddie Van Halen started to do his and whatnot, they really came about and went off with that. And then when Eddie Van Halen met with Kramer's founder on the plane, they drew up the Kramer Beretta, and it all went from there.
So Charlie, you mentioned the trem bridge, like a Floyd Rose specifically, like a locking tremolo system,
Yes.
right?
I would say, I mean, the Super Strat has evolved into something else. No, I'm saying, but I would say, yeah, for that period, humbucker and a
Yes.
Floyd, or,
Right.
or locking tremolo. I mean, and Carlos, my manager, was telling me today, like, some of these are not really accurate because Jacksons didn't have Floyds, right? They had Kahlers, but
Yep.
a locking trem.
Right.
Now it's, you know, you've got all these boutique builders who do stuff that's sort of a
Sure.
Super Strat, but at the time I would say you had to have a humbucker there and a locking tremolo.
Yeah.
For sure.
That would be the safest definition.
And you bring up simple controls too, which I hadn't occurred to me, but I look at a lot of the Strat style guitars that we have with us now, and obviously with Dana's, there is only one pickup, so there's only going to be so many.
Well, that's
controls
where
you
Edwards
have.
is, just out of volume.
But yeah, but you just have the one knob. This also is just this
Simple.
Kramer, one
Yeah.
knob and a pickup selector. Yeah, no, that's super cool. Because when I think of I asked that because I kind of came from a place of ignorance where in my head a Super Strat would have been, yeah, humbucker in the bridge, but it would still have a Stratocaster's normal middle and neck pickup perhaps. And I would have thought maybe a faster neck would have also been kind of a go-to.
Yeah. I mean,
But-
yeah.
Yeah.
It was important, and also having a 22nd fret, I think, was important for these
Yes,
guys.
most definitely.
But you're right about Kramer, because Kramer was really kind of the first. Well, yeah, I mean, they were the first to kind of mass market it, right? And thanks to Edwards' endorsement, and the first nice guitar I bought in 1987 at Chuck Levin's when I was a kid was a Kramer Pacer. Because it was hum single. I
Okay.
still have the guitar. It's modified, but because it had humbucker and it had a Floyd Rose.
Yeah.
And that was it.
That was what
I
you
was like,
honed
that
in on.
one.
Right.
I mean, the guy only gave me, he's like, well, you can get that one or that one in that price range. And my parents were there, and I'm like, the Kramer. And so that's what, and that's, they were the first one to really kind of push that. And others kind of, I think Charvel and Jackson kind of traded on their history in that era and then have developed a lot of cool products since then. But But yeah, Kramer was really instrumental.
Okay.
Because you saw it, when I was there, I was a kid in that, and you look through the guitar magazines, and you're like, oh, now Vivian Campbell plays Kramer. I remember the very first time I saw Tony McAlpine's record. You've seen that record, Edge of Insanity? On the back, he's got a Kramer pacer. Everybody was playing those, so you can't really underestimate how important Kramer was to that era. But it was so competitive, dude. I mean, you don't even realize, you'd be looking through magazines and like, oh, this guy's endorsing this brand, and da-da-da-da-da, and then, you know, somebody's playing Jackson, and then a year later somebody's playing, and then Ibanez came, so it was kind of an astonishing little mini era, because things were just changing, and you know, it was in retail. Guys were making tons of money. You know?
Well, that was noteworthy too, because you suddenly had all of these, like, there's a lot of companies that are still around, and they made their mark by jumping on what was at the time a trend, but has now been an enduring part of modern guitar playing. Is these guitars, right?
Yeah.
Like ESP, Ibanez, you know, to a lesser extent Jackson, Kramer, right? So.
Yeah, I would say, you know, to a lesser extent Jackson, Kramer, Charvel been really. I mean, the companies have changed hands many times, and thankfully they're now, Jackson and Charvel are both being made, or you know, owned by Fender and made by Fender, and they're doing a great job. Thankfully, and you know, the designs have changed a lot. Which reminds me, I wanted to, don't forget. Here's a Charvel, yes, J.K. Lee, who was there at that time. You know, one of the things I always find really interesting, Charlie, I wanted to ask you, I'm sure you know the answer to this. I was thinking about preparing for this event here, and I was like, okay, so, you know, I have a very strong idea who are the big three of metal guitar of the 80s. Who are those? And we know, of course, one is Edward Van Halen, so who are the other two?
Ooh, okay.
The big three.
Randy Rhoads.
Yeah. Yes.
Has to be on there.
Yes.
Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads, undoubtedly.
Okay.
And then the third is a hard one, because, like...
We should have grabbed the Randy Rhoads v.
Well,
Emery.
Yeah, we should have.
We failed. I know.
You have to talk about him a lot actually, because. But think, okay, I'll give you a hint. He was contemporary of those guys. They all saw each other play at the same time.
There's George Lynch,
Yes,
Warren DeMartini.
that good. Yep. Yes, good. He got it. First guess. Yes, I would say George Lynch.
Yeah.
Mr. Dog.
Because
Mr. Scary.
Because they all playing in Southern California at the same time when they were young, and they all saw each other play, and they all kind of, well, George took a little bit longer for Dokken to get big, but you know, those two, Randy and Ed, they just exploded onto the scene. Yep. And the thing, you know, Randy was not a super Strat player at all, but he copped, I would say it's fair to say that he was influenced by Ed and a lot of that stuff that was going on, and he kind of made it his own.
Oh, yeah.
And then, you know, Jackson guitars and these sort of, you know, these Rhodes-inspired shapes have sort of a subset of that whole trend. And you would see these all over the 80s, too.
Pointy guitars.
Yes.
Big.
But they're harder to play, and, you know, they're harder to keep from, they're harder to do a lot of things on, in my opinion. Strats are a little more comfortable, but but you know, they all shared similar elements in terms of their tone and their style, and they're all right around the same age. You know?
Yeah.
You know.
So with Randy in the 80s guitar god pantheon, why do you think he didn't? Why do you think he's not known for playing a super Strat? He's known for playing like these.
Well, it's because
Vs
that's what he played,
like
and then he died so young.
Yeah.
And there's only about 3 years where he was out there doing stuff.
Yeah.
He may have changed.
Maybe.
I mean,
He could have. Because he was a big Les Paul custom guy. He had Les Paul custom shop, played the hell out of that guitar, and then he sat down with Grover Jackson, and they drew up the Concorde, which is the predecessor to this guitar.
Right.
And that's like the one with the white, kind of off-white guitar with the pinstripes on it. And then they did give him a prototype model of that before he passed. And that's how we have this shape now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often like to think about what he would have done if he had lived. Same thing with Hendrix, but you know. But I don't know if you want to get it back to super Strats, but that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, just because I always found it so fascinating how those guys they knew each other sort of peripherally, and they were all aware of each other.
Yes.
And one of the things what was interesting to me is, especially when I was a kid in the 80s, and it may be like that now, is like there was a culture of like guitar competition and dominance
Yes.
in your town. And it existed, and it may have started before that, but I think the scene in the mid 70s LA was the first time that really happened in America.
Yes.
And it was wild, man, because those kids were, I'm sure you've read stories about how those guys lived when they were kids.
Oh,
They
yeah.
just, but it carried right over until the 80s, and maybe it died down a bit in the 90s, but I think it still exists now. Just like if you're a kid, if you play sports, you want to be the best. You measure
Yeah,
yourself
it's the
against.
same thing.
So I'm sure you're the best guitar player in your school, right?
Respectfully,
Well,
yes.
respectfully,
Yes.
yes.
Oh,
yes.
now he's humble.
But yeah, I mean, but you're lucky now because now you can on the web and live streams.
Yes,
but
very
when
good
I was a kid,
resources.
you just had to, you would go listen to bands practicing, and or you'd go to, you were too young to really go to clubs or anything. So
Yeah, so just do your best to listen over and over
Yeah.
and over.
Then
Yeah.
you go back to the same spot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
it was a wild time though.
Yeah. So after Eddie cobbled together his Frankenstein guitars, so you guys were saying that that's kind of the prototypical Super Strat,
Yes,
right?
for sure.
How quickly after that, was it just like the following year, did a lot of mass manufactured guitars of that style?
I think it was probably about 4 or 5
Yeah.
years,
Okay.
82, 83.
Because
Yeah.
they started trying to copy him, and a lot of people were copying the black and white stripes, so they put the red on it. But the mass production of Super Strats and that kind of like push for that didn't start till like almost the mid 80s, like early to mid 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I think when he joined Kramer,
Yes.
that was the first kind of explosion, and everybody got a Kramer, and then all the other brands kind of started to catch up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were making a ton of money,
Yeah.
ton of money. And then in this sort of mid-Atlantic, northeast music store region, I mean, they were everywhere.
Right.
Everywhere. Because the Kramer, they were based in Jersey, I think. So.
Yep.
Would Eddie have also been then the catalyst for all the crazy bright color finishes?
Yep.
Bright
Yes.
right outside of your usual
Yeah.
black, red, and white.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? That's what I'm
Stratocasters,
saying.
yeah.
It's just like, I mean.
And there was just this constant one-upmanship until
Yeah.
we finally get to like highlighter yellow and
Yeah.
Pretty
right,
much.
and like
Yeah.
the retina searing pinks.
Well,
and-
but in the scene in the 80s at that time, it was so, photogenic and with the hair and with the clothes, so you had to compete with that. And, it's Van Halen's, it's mostly their fault that happened, but none of those bands ever were as good, you know what I mean? But that was very, very important. And also you got to keep in mind that was the beginning of MTV, and that was something somebody could watch.
right.
Yeah, man, all those crazy paint jobs, I think it was all due to him.
Right. Oh, I guess color TV would have been in
Color
home more
TV,
often, right?
yeah.
So
That was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
black, white, and TV yellow
No,
needed
not-
something more than that.
Yeah. And don't forget I just said on my thing. And don't forget the poofy hair as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, no, he didn't invent that. He didn't invent that.
Man, I'm absorbing the little history lesson that I just got. I came into this with some assumptions, obviously that were not entirely correct, but no, that's a great rundown of what makes these instruments like different from because you look at them initially and it's just like oh, that's just a Strat
Yeah.
with a nice top and a
Yeah.
different pickup layout, but like it's not. Yeah, it plays well in its balance.
They're
but
meant
like
to be.
It's a different animal.
They're meant to be very much. It's like I think he would have really loved this analogy. It's meant to be like a high performance car, like a Lamborghini or
Sure.
a Ferrari. He would talk. I've seen him, interviewed where he's like, "Dude, I just want to be able to play a note and it just ring." He didn't want to play hard. He had very low action, light gauge strings. He wanted it to be easy.
Yeah.
Although I think he had had strong hands, he could have played whatever. But that was the sort of the analogy. And we didn't really talk much about amps, but his amp, the tweaks that he did to his amps, and then later the amp designs were massively important too. And that's another thing that a lot of these companies have been chasing for decades, just to try and get something in one box that gets that sound,
Right.
Which it was very hard to do back in the day. But yeah, really a Super Strat. It's built for speed.
Yeah.
Because a Fender Strat, no offense to Fender, they are now, but back in the day they were not really easy guitars to play.
Okay. So, like,
for the most part, I would say.
chunky necks or
Well,
like
yeah,
different,
and I mean, the single coil pickups and the standard tremolo system, and kind of, but again, this circles back to the beginning. It's a modular guitar.
Yeah.
So it's something you can take apart, work on, set up better,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what he did.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
Got a question from the interweb.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Let's see. Charlie mentioned simple controls, but can you demo the different sounds you can get with those simple controls?
Can you?
Well,
There's only a few, but I can do that. So we got off and we got on. But there is a couple in between. So there you can do it. It's very kind of like off clean. It's lower. It's still clear, but you have your clarity, less gain. So then you got your midway, which is. The in-between sound, and then as you're 3/4 of the way up, it's a bit more, and then all the way, because you can't do all the gain stuff if you got doesn't really have the same gain. So the main two with the Super Strat is off and on. There are a few in between you can work with.
But yeah, those guys would always be messing with the, Edward did that all the time.
Yeah, or
Right.
Yeah, I mean, both of these guitars are just one volume and one pickup, so it's basically, and that was the kind of setup that a lot of guys use. But you'd see guitars with two pickups, obviously, and just select between the two of them, which is a pretty standard, more of a Gibson setup. Just having two pickups and a three-way pickup selector. So
Yeah, and speaking of Gibson, Fender and Gibson were not just complacent this whole time. I think they definitely identified.
Well, they were getting smoked.
Yeah, they were getting right.
And both of the companies were, I think they were going through ownership changes they were imminent, and they both tried to jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
And I would say well, Gibson, this is a little bit different, but Gibson and Fender did try and make more sort of metal vibing guitars, and some of them weren't so successful. The Explorer was very successful, and this kind of, and so guitars like, although the Explorer I think appeared in the late 50s.
Yes.
The guys could
58,
be
yep.
in the department may want to hopefully not correct me, but they reissued this in the 80s, I guess, in the 70s and 80s, and it became very, very common again.
Well, yeah, and then when I initially took this out of the case, that was what kind of struck me, is that Explorers traditionally will have a pickguard, and usually it's a contrasting pickguard. This is completely clean, which both of these guitars also are conspicuously missing a pickguard.
Yes.
And then likewise, this is definitely not like what I'm used to with an Explorer neck. This is definitely faster. Yeah.
No, so
so they were definitely paying attention,
Yeah.
if not, still getting their lunch money taken from them.
Well, no, but but then, and then things go through cycles, and then these,
Right.
As the music got a little bit heavier, these type of guitars, although a lot of shred guys would remember Matthias Jabs?
Yeah,
he had
yeah,
a great
Scorpion.
Explorer, and
That
he had a
was
Strat, and he had it was obviously a very Van Halen influenced Strat, but he would switch back and forth. The tones aren't that dissimilar. That's the thing. It's like putting a humbucker in a basswood body or alder ash body. It's not that different than a humbucker and a mahogany.
Yeah,
but you're mainly hearing the pickup, I would say.
it is true.
I think what was smart with Gibson and Fender is, as they sort of they cycled through that era, as they kind of came back to what they were originally known for.
Yeah, my dad actually, I have one of his old guitars. I wish I would have brought it now that I think about it. But it's a Gibson Explorer E2 or Explorer 2 from 1981, and it's got a curly maple top on it, and he put a DiMarzio Super Distortion from then. That one actually sounds a lot different than the ones they have now, because like the ceramic magnet is a little bit more screechy, but in a good way. But that guitar is absolute tank, and it's very heavy, but the sound that comes with it, and as it's aged, it's gotten better too. But the guitars that they had come out in that time period were very aesthetically pleasing and meant for speed as well, as much as they could, still staying true to like the Gibson style of neck and fretboard. but they definitely did try to kind of pull up next to the Super Strats.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they would put tremolos on them and all
Yep.
this stuff, and guys would buy, guys would endorse them, and then a couple years later, you don't see them.
Yeah.
You see them kicking around used, and if you know that era, you go, oh, that's kind of cool, and people say, oh, is it worth a lot? And you're like, no, not really, but it's cool to have.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know.
and they would try different like aesthetic stuff too. Like, wasn't that when the Silver Burst kind of came around? Was in the 80s?
I think originally it was late 70s.
Oh, was it?
If we're
Okay.
talking about the ones that the guitars that Adam Jones of Tool later made popular, I think those were 79.
Oh, okay.
But weird bursts like that, you would start to see things like
Yeah,
that.
which-
I'm not sure when the first Silver Burst was.
Yeah.
I know it's become very trendy over the last 10,
Right.
15
Yeah.
years.
Which compared to something like this, Jackson Kelly is very tame, but I feel like for Gibson that is, reinventing the wheel.
Well, sure, yeah, and it was for them at that period. I mean, late 70s Gibson stuff was getting, there was some pretty bold stuff.
Yeah.
But it was still kind of, it seemed to me it was like still kind of coming out of the hard rock and progressive rock era.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where the Silver Burst, that's a subject for a whole other video.
Okay.
I'd have to do a lot
We'll
of
have to remember
research. Yes.
Got an online question.
Good.
Let me get it. If they could make their own signature 80s Super Strats, what would Charlie and Dana's guitars look like?
Ooh. Who wants to go first? Charlie, you probably already have an idea, don't you?
Charlie makes his own guitars.
Actually, I've built 2 guitars. Personally, I like Northern Ash wood. It's extremely dense, so the weight of it is bone crushing. I will have back problems when I'm older, but I regret nothing. It looks awesome, and it sounds great too. But I have an Explorer based off my dad's guitar, and the first Super Strat that I made a Charvel, like Warren D. Martini, George Lynch, San Dimas looking one, and my father owns DC Hot Rods and does custom hot rod and paint work, so he painted up this crazy orange paint job with stripes and panels and pinstriping, gold leaf trim, all these different things, but on it, it sounds just as good as it looks. So I put a EVH Frankenstein pickup in both the guitars. They're pretty much the same guitar, just different look. A wood screw mounted R3 Floyd Rose that is non-recessed, so it always goes back to the same spot because I had tuning instability. And then as far as the neck goes, it just had a straight 12 radius, because most companies now they have different things like compound with different technology, but I wanted to be like tried and true to what my dad's guitar was because I played that one so much. And more than anything, it was built for speed, and it had just a lacquer finish, wasn't any paint on the neck. And then the second one that I built, I took a lot of what I learned from the first one and put into that one as well. So the bridge was a little bit higher up, same pickup, crazy paint job with cobwebs and flames and everything. And then we painted the headstock on that one, but I got a one-piece neck that time, and it did change. It actually changed the sound a little bit from what I was expecting, but I love it. But those are what my 2 custom Super Strats would look like.
Okay, Dana, in 3 words or less, what would your ideal 80s Super Strat be?
Well,
Why 3 words or less?
that was a lot. Well, I mainly play 7-string guitar now, and so they didn't really exist then. So, but what I would just like something,
Like that?
basswood body with 2 humbucking pickups, 24 fret neck, bolt on, 6 or 7 string, preferably with some sort of push-pull coil tap to make it sound, which they weren't that, it wasn't really done that much back then. But that would be what I would want. Easy, finish, I'm not anywhere near as in the weeds as but Charlie builds guitars. I just sell them. I don't build them.
Yeah, but you play them too. No, that sounds like a great
Yeah,
instrument.
pretty standard stuff.
Yeah.
Nothing with nothing too crazy artwork. So
Classy.
I would say I'm like I'm a guy who's a connoisseur of the evolution of Super Strats. You know what I mean?
Right.
The more sort of refined dad's Super Strats, or the Gen X Super Strat, or you know what I mean, the middle-aged man Super Strat.
The dad Strat.
The dad Strat.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I can get behind that.
Yeah. So, but that's kind of what was around for the last 20 years. So
Yeah.
that's
They
what I like.
didn't ask me, but my Super Strat would be probably very similar setup to yours, Floyd. I imagine that's an EMG like 81 or something like that, right? One volume control in a telly body.
Okay, yeah, those exist. That's
Dad
a big
Strat.
thing. That's a dad strap. For sure.
Another question for Charlie on the screen.
Excellent. Hey, Charlie, how do you set up your amps? Great tone.
Thank you so much for the compliment. I set up my amps, and it took me a very long time to work it out. I used to play Marshall DSL 100 heads. I blew up 2 of them. And then I got an EVH 5153 head. I set up my tone more on the high-end side of things. I know a lot of people nowadays focus more on bass and whatnot, but I turn the mids up to about halfway and crank them back a little bit to kind of take out that middle edge that can sometimes spark the ear and be like, no. So as far as the bass goes and resonance, these amps have resonance control. I was not familiar with that before, but it's basically just presence for your low end. I kind of match, the bass is less than the treble, but the bass is up past halfway. As far as treble goes, it's closer to 6 to 7. It depends on the guitar, because the guitar can be more airy or dense, and then the presence is matched to whatever the high end is, and the resonance is matched to the presence. So they kind of cancel each other out, while as Ford having this kind of punch. And I don't have the gain turned up as high as you may think. The gain is turned up about midway, because these amps crank.
They're very, very hot.
Yes.
They're very good.
I love them though. And
Yeah.
It's very pleasant in the room here. I will admit, this is great. Yeah.
Pleasant smelling?
No, pleasant sounding.
Sounding.
I won't comment on any
No
of the other
comment on the
senses.
smells. I
But,
had onions for lunch. Sorry, I didn't.
And then reverb. Reverb is a big thing too. Time-based effects I try to have in the mix, like from the delay pedal, kind of like that spaced out Van Halen delay, as well as just good spring reverb. If you have plate reverb, that's even better too. But that's how I set up my tone as kind of a starting.
Nice, great question.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that also will come from the fact that like you gravitate to guitars like this, and that the
Yes.
guitar and the amp will always have that relationship. So you've definitely kind of found out where you like to live
Yeah.
with the style that you play and the amps that you like to play through.
Yes.
Yeah.
When it comes to more of like a Gibson guitar, if I play my dad's guitar, I actually have to go in and change the settings of my amp.
Yeah.
Like when I play my guitars that I built, it's the same settings for both.
Yeah, and that's been my experience playing with guitarists. Is something that I as a a simple-minded drummer pick up, is the guitarists that are constant like tone hunters are always swapping between like a Strat, a Les Paul, and maybe like a hollow body. And
Yeah.
of course, like all three of those guitars are going to speak differently through the same amplifier, and
Most
so it's the
definitely.
constant knob twirling. Whereas if you're just swapping between not necessarily a body style, but definitely like an electronics setup.
Yeah, like the setup is the same.
Similar between guitars, yeah. You're always gonna, and then you now can spend all that time dialing in that sound that plays nice between
Yes.
the two instruments. So, well, guys, thank you so much for the history lesson, the schooling on what a Super Strat is and isn't. Before we go, I'd like to close by announcing that we are, in fact, running a giveaway. We are giving away a Marty Friedman Jackson guitar that's been, am I right with this, Emery? It's been signed by Marty Friedman.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you can head to chucklevin's.com/giveaways, and we will also have that URL in the comments and the description. Sign up for the giveaway, win a signed guitar that's been graced with a Marty Friedman signature.
From
From
Maryland.
Maryland.
Yes.
Marty Friedman bought his first guitars from Paul Shine, who still works in the guitar department.
See, this is why we bring him in here.
Yes.
I don't know. No one tells me this stuff.
You
That's
didn't
very
know we were
important
talking
information.
about it
That's
earlier.
super important.
And then he went to
Let's go.
Hollywood and became a big
He
star.
grew up
Right.
around the corner from me.
Yeah.
Yeah, where was he? Do you know where he grew up?
Laurel.
Laurel, that's what I
Yeah.
thought. I was like Columbia,
I'm
Laurel.
in Odenton, so I'm like right down the street.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, dang. I'm glad you two were here. Small world. And so we're giving away that guitar. Next week we'll be sharing an interview we did with him while he was on tour in the area. So
was there.
look out for that. Charlie was there. We hope to see everyone tonight at the TGIF concert up the road. And for now, I think I'll let you guys play us out.
Okay.
Sure.
2, 3. All right, good job, Charlie.
You too, man.
You